Okay, here's the video for the second page of the review packet. Now the top section of this says sketch each angle, then find the reference angle. So what it wants us to do is it wants us to draw a picture of this listed angle in standard position. So we just need to keep in mind that our quadrantal angles are 90, 180, 270, and 360, so that we know what quadrant our angle is supposed to end up in. Now, if we're graphing 210 degrees, that would be between 180 and 270. So, we're going to start off drawing one side of our angle, starting at the origin and going out along the positive x-axis. And the second side of our angle will be somewhere in quadrant 3. It does not matter where. Now from there, to complete our picture, we simply label it 210 degrees. Now the second part of this says find the reference angle. There will be a reference item that shows how to find the reference angle in each quadrant. And it looks something like this. In quadrant 1, the reference angle is the angle. In quadrant 2, the reference angle is 180 minus the angle. In quadrant 3, the reference angle is the angle minus 180 degrees. And in quadrant 4, the reference angle is 360 minus the angle. So there's a different rule depending on which quadrant our angle is ending in. In this case, our angle is ending in quadrant 3. So we would go to that reference item and we'd say to ourselves, in quadrant 3, the reference angle is the angle minus 180 degrees. And we'd say the reference angle is 210 minus 180, or 30 degrees. So we have two parts to the answer, the picture and the reference angle. So we're going to do two more examples here, and then I'm going to again suggest that you pause the video and try the next three on your own before I do them on the next slide. And again with the last three. 225 is also in quadrant 3, so it's going to have a very similar picture. We're going to start off drawing an angle in the third quadrant and labeling it 225 degrees. Then we're going to say the reference angle for quadrant 3 is the angle minus 180 degrees. So that would be 225 minus 180, or 45 degrees would be the reference angle. Same thing for the last one. 160 degrees, though, is in quadrant 2. So we would draw an angle in quadrant 2, and the accuracy of it is unimportant as long as it's in quadrant 2, and it is labeled 160 degrees. In quadrant 2, our rule is different. The reference angle is 180 minus the angle. So in this case, the reference angle would be 180 minus 160, or 20 degrees. Again, pause the video and try the next three on your own. Okay. So, 300 degrees. 300 degrees is in quadrant 4. So we should go look up this reference item. Now if you're not sure what section this reference item is in your notes, I can look that up real quick. That won't take very long. I know it's back in chapter 1 or 2. Let's see here. It is in quadrant 2, section 2-2. It is found on page 55 in your textbook and in your notes. So page 55 in your textbook and in your notes for section 2-2. Okay, 300 degrees is in quadrant 4. So again, we would show an angle that ends in quadrant 4 and then label it with 300 degrees. In quadrant 4, the reference angle is 360 minus the angle. That's the rule for quadrant 4. So in this case, the reference angle would be 360 minus 300, or 60 degrees. On the next one, 310 degrees is also in quadrant 4. So it's going to be a very similar looking picture. The only difference will be the label will now say 310 degrees. The work will also be the same, 360 minus 310, meaning the reference angle is 50 degrees. And finally 200 degrees, well this is 180 and this is 270, so 200 is in quadrant 3. Again, it's all about the label, 200 degrees. And we would say the reference angle is in quadrant 2, the reference angle, or sorry, in quadrant 3, which is where we are, going too fast. The reference angle is the angle minus 180 degrees. So that would be 200 minus 180, or 20 degrees. Again, you should pause the video and try the next 3. If you got those 3 right, you could probably skip ahead in the video and go to the next section. Alright, so here are the last 3. 150 degrees is in quadrant 2, so your picture should be in quadrant 2 with a label of 150 degrees. God, that's not very straight, but whatever. The reference angle then would be 180 minus the angle, or 180 minus 150. Reference angle is 30 degrees. 195 degrees is in quadrant 3, so we draw a picture in quadrant 3 and label it 195 degrees. That also means that the reference angle is the angle minus 180 degrees. So that would be 195 minus 180, or 15 degrees. Finally, 330 degrees, that is in quadrant 4. So we would draw an angle that is ended in quadrant 4 and label it with 330 degrees of positive rotation. The reference angle then would be, and my pen just screwed up and changed over, 360 minus the angle. So that would be 360 minus 330, meaning the reference angle is 30 degrees. Okay, so that brings us to the next section of your final exam, which is going to be use your unit circle to find the exact value of each trigonometric function. Now, I mentioned earlier that I screwed up number 15. That problem should not be on there, so cross that off now if you have not already. That problem should not be on there. It doesn't appear on the unit circle. Every other value here, whether it be in degrees or in radians, is a value that appears on your unit circle. Now remember that your unit circle we've filled out pretty extensively here. We have got an angle measure in degrees on the inside, an angle measure in radians just beyond that, and then around the outside we have all these points. And these points represent the cosine and sine for x and y of each angle. So here we're being asked about sine and cosine. Well, you know, the cosine of 120 degrees. So we go to the unit circle, we find 120 degrees, we go out, and the cosine is the first number in that point. So the cosine would be negative 1/2. Cosine of 11 pi over 6. So we go to the unit circle, we find 11 pi over 6, which is a radian measure. It's 330 degrees. The cosine would be the first number, or root 3 over 2. Okay. Again, you should pause the video and try the other 3 on your own. Okay, sine of 315 degrees, sine of 315. We find 315, we go out. The second number is the sine, so negative root 2 over 2. Okay, the cosine of 4 pi over 3. So go to the unit circle, we find 4 pi over 3, that's 240 degrees. The cosine is the first number, which is negative 1/2. And finally, the sine of 5 pi over 6, we go and we find 5 pi over 6, which is 150 degrees. We're looking for the sine, which is the second number. That would be 1/2. That should do it for the second page.